This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Forget the frustration of picking commerce platforms when you switch your business to Shopify, the global commerce platform that supercharges your selling wherever you sell. With Shopify, you'll harness the same intuitive features, trusted apps, and powerful analytics used by the world's leading brands. Sign up today for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/tech, all lowercase. That's shopify.com/tech.
Bored with your boring cardio? Stop pedaling that snooze cycle to Nowheresville and try some cardio that's actually fun. Supernatural Fitness, available on MetaQuest. Isn't that right, Jane Fonda?
Cardio will never be boring again.
Sweat to the beat of thousands of chart-topping songs inside stunning virtual landscapes.
Bet your stationary bike can't do that.
Visit GetSupernatural.com and join the next fitness revolution. Supernatural VR Fitness, only on MetaQuest. Rated T for Teen.
Hello and welcome to Outward, Slate's podcast about queer culture, politics, and everything else rattling around in our pretty little heads. I'm Christina Cauterucci, a senior writer at Slate, and this week I want to talk about something that's kind of been keeping me up at night. You might have actually seen this news already. Meta, the company that owns Facebook and Instagram, recently rolled out a whole slew of changes to its policies, basically reducing the types of content that the company will moderate on its platforms. So that means some things that used to get your post deleted on Facebook or Insta are now fair game, including some hate speech about queer and trans people. So according to the guidelines that Meta sent out to employees, content moderators will no longer flag posts that say things like, and these are the company's own examples, trans people aren't real, they're mentally ill. Gays are not normal. A trans woman isn't a woman, it's a pathetic, confused man. A trans person isn't a he or a she, it's an it. And the most common transphobic slur is no longer prohibited either. Now, it's no coincidence that this all came down just weeks before Donald Trump takes office. Mark Zuckerberg, the Meta CEO, and other tech leaders are falling all over themselves to curry favor with the new president and align themselves and their companies with his ideological agenda. So here to help me think through all this is Kate Knibbs, a senior writer at Wired, who wrote a great piece about Meta's new policies, and we'll get into that after the break. Here's a little tip for all the music fans out there. Discover is accepted at 99% of places that take credit cards nationwide. You heard right, 99%. And every time you make a purchase with your card, you automatically earn cash back, which means you could earn rewards for those almost front row seats, ride shares to the venue, even that concert merch you've had your eye on since it dropped. If all of that sounds like music to your ears, remember, it pays to Discover, based on the February 2024 Nielsen report. Learn more at discover.com/credit card.
Hey there, Ryan Reynolds here. It's a new year, and you know what that means. No, not the diet. Resolutions. A way for us all to try and do a little bit better than we did last year. And my resolution, unlike big wireless, is to not be a raging and raise the price of wireless on you every chance I get. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment required, equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes on unlimited. See mintmobile.com for details.
Bored with your boring cardio? Stop pedaling that snooze cycle to Nowheresville and try some cardio that's actually fun. Supernatural Fitness, available on MetaQuest. Isn't that right, Jane Fonda?
Cardio will never be boring again.
Sweat to the beat of thousands of chart-topping songs inside stunning virtual landscapes.
Bet your stationary bike can't do that.
Visit GetSupernatural.com and join the next fitness revolution. Supernatural VR Fitness, only on MetaQuest. Rated T for Teen.
We're back with Kate Knibbs of Wired. Kate, welcome to Outward.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm sorry I'm here to talk about something so depressing.
I know. I mean, I'm sorry that you had to write about it. So I have to admit, I was a little bit surprised by this policy shift, mainly because I didn't know that the previous policy existed in the first place. I assumed, obviously you couldn't use slurs, but I didn't know that you couldn't say homosexuality is a mental illness or whatever. What a nice policy to have in place. What other things used to be prohibited that are now okay to say?
So Meta actually, it is very convenient, has this sort of history of its hate speech policies listed in its Transparency Center. And when the news came out, like the initial headlines around all these changes were focused on the fact that Meta was ending its fact-checking efforts. And once that came out, I just happened to be looking at the hate speech policy page because I was curious whether there was going to be anything about fact-checking on it. And then I sort of stumbled upon the fact that they had just released an updated version. So they've been offering sort of a glimpse into their hate speech moderation for many years. The first one on there is in like 2016, 2017. So it's been a while. And the initial language was sort of broad and it was a pretty bare bones document, but over the years it was fleshed out considerably. And it was, basically guidelines ensuring that people had a civil time and weren't bullied or dehumanized on the platform. So there was a lot of language just ensuring that anyone in a protected class, which includes, religious minorities, ethnic minorities, immigrants, gay and trans people, were given special consideration in this document, that you couldn't go out of your way and sort of insult them based on their protected characteristics.
Okay, so you could say something that's not a protected characteristic would be like a journalist. You could be like, journalists are mentally ill, but you couldn't say, queer people are mentally ill.
So it sort of preserved the right to be rude online, but made sure that you weren't basically just putting forth hateful rhetoric that could really damage people. And there were a lot of things about the updated document that jumped out to me and my editor immediately because they were so surprising. And I say this as someone who has been reporting on Meta for years. Meta has done lots of bad things over the years. I maybe shouldn't be surprised that they would do something so shitty, but it was eye-popping that they would go out of their way to update the language to basically carve out room to be cruel to gay, trans, queer people. In addition to that change, it also carved out more space to make hateful comments about immigrants. So not great. And also the changes were very obviously sort of tethered to certain facets of right-wing ideology. It's not like they were randomly plucked. It's because they tie back to opinions held by very prominent right-wing ideologues that are currently very close to the White House as of Monday.
Yeah. In this policy, it literally says, we don't allow hateful conduct on Facebook, Instagram, or Threads. And it says we remove dehumanizing speech. And so, obviously that feels like it contradicts what the rest of the policy does and does not allow. So, what's the rationale, whether we agree with it or not? How is Meta justifying this?
It's interesting. They're not really going out of their way to justify it on the record. One thing that really upsets me, honestly, is the idea that they're able to include this because obviously they're not going to go about deliberately contradicting themselves. And the implication of that is They don't see this as dehumanizing, which is frightening. They see it as within the bounds of normal, quote unquote, political discourse. So that's honestly worse. that's worse to me.
Yeah, the implication would be that, they used to think that this was hate speech, and now they're like, oh, now it's relevant political speech. And I read one statement from, I guess, a spokesperson who said something like, well, if you can say it on the floor of Congress and on TV, you should be able to say it on our platform, which, it's like the degradation of political discourse in politics is clearly influencing what they're allowing on this platform.
Absolutely. And it actually wasn't just a random spokesperson who said that. It was Joel Kaplan, who is now one of the head honchos. He's been at Meta for a while, working sort of in the government lobbying side of things. And now he was just promoted to a greater position of power, and this was one of his first moves. And he's a long time sort of right-wing operative. He was the deputy chief of staff for George W. Bush, and he is also pretty well known because back when all of the 2000 election hanging Chad, Florida, who's going to be president situation was happening, he sort of rose to prominence then because he was a lawyer doing an observation during what was called the Brooks Brothers riot, which is when a bunch of pro George W. Bush people stormed into a room. Anyway, so he's been around for a long time, and now he's really, really prominent, even more so than he was before at Meta. And this was sort of him putting a stamp on Meta, I think.
I mean, looking at some of these examples that the company provided internally to employees, it feels extraordinarily belabored to try to be drawing some of these fine lines between what is and what isn't allowed. So, for example, you can say Black people are more violent than white people, but you can't say white people are smarter than Black people because they're like, oh, there's something specific about claiming intellectual superiority that is particularly hateful, and we're not going to allow that. And, there are other instances, too, where it's like if you just change one little thing about what you're saying, you're spreading hate either way, and you're amplifying harmful and untrue stereotypes. But it feels like they're trying really hard to allow the most amount of hateful content possible while maintaining this sort of facade of moderation.
Content moderation is a difficult, if not impossible, task to do well at scale. It just is. I don't know a single platform that actually does a very good job of content moderation. And I am sympathetic to that. A lot of the people who are running these platforms, when they got into it, they didn't understand that part of their job would be deciding what is true or false, deciding what is hate and what is not hate, deciding what's a terrorist and what's a freedom fighter. It's hard. It is hard. And I understand truly the impulse to try to pare back responsibility from on the platform's end and sort of just say let's let the users sort it out, whatever. This is impossible. A private company shouldn't even be in a position to decide what's true or not or whatever. I do understand where that argument comes from because I think, what if I worked for these companies? I would be tearing my hair out trying to get it right. It's so hard to get right. It's striking how wrong they got it here, though, because they're still they are still deciding what is hate speech and what is not hate speech. It's not like they said, you know what, we can't be the arbiters of what's hateful or not. We are washing our hands of this. We'll let communities police themselves. They're not doing that. They still have a very long, detailed document about what is hate speech and what isn't hate speech. It just now is blatantly transphobic, queerphobic, and xenophobic. It's wild.
Yeah, the other thing that stood out to me about the policy shift is that the types of speech that they're allowing or not allowing is just one part of it. There's also, they're ending their fact-checking partnerships. And there's also things that sort of used to be automatically flagged. Now they're like, well, we're not going to do anything about this unless somebody individually reports it, basically leaving it up to individual people to be like, okay, this violates the policy, please take a look at it. How is that going to affect the experience on Facebook or Instagram?
I think that will have a significant impact for some people, and other people might not notice. It really depends on what's in your feeds. I think a bigger, honestly, day-to-day thing that we're all going to notice is the just onslaught of AI slop. A big misapprehension that a lot of people have about how Facebook's fact-checking worked was this idea that it was super political and biased and pulling down Washington Examiner or Breitbart posts. That was happening occasionally, but a big chunk of Facebook's fact-checking endeavors were devoted to just getting rid of very, very obvious fake news, not political, just the Pope died when he didn't die sort of thing. That's what it was doing. It was mainly just getting rid of a lot of the obvious bullshit. And so,
which was created by content farms just for clicks, basically.
That's going to be the thing that we probably notice more is just the content farms that aren't ideological, but are just out there to make a buck are going to have a field day with this. When it comes to the automatic stuff, this goes back to me saying content moderation is hard. Facebook was taking down a lot of posts that should have been left up, frankly. Journalists, there's been a lot written about how pro-Palestine voices have been treated on Instagram. The idea that Facebook needed to change its automatic speech flagging policies, I don't think that was necessarily a bad idea. I just think that the way that it's being wrapped up with all of these other changes makes me skeptical about what is going to happen. My main point is that Facebook could have made major overhauls and probably should have made major overhauls to its content moderation policies in a way that didn't belittle and dehumanize gay and trans people and immigrants. And they just chose to do it in a cruel and arbitrary and terrible way.
We're going to take a quick break, but we'll be back with more on what Meta's new policies tell us about our new political reality. We're back with Kate Knibbs of Wired. Kate, why is Meta doing this, and why now?
Well, I don't know if you heard, but there's actually a new president. It's definitely tied to Trump. Trump.
That did break through my political bubble, actually.
This is a very, I think, straightforward attempt to curry favor with the new administration and all of its acolytes. And I think it's best understood as part of like a larger right-wing shift in Silicon Valley happening now. It's not that Silicon Valley was actually like a secret socialist paradise before. Techno-libertarians have always been a very prominent part of culture, and maybe we're just sort of playing it cooler in like the 2010s. This is part of like an industry-wide groveling effort to become, I don't even know. It's just, it doesn't seem like a very savvy, fine with being evil. It doesn't seem like a very savvy approach, to be honest. But yeah, this is just an attempt to curry favor with the Trump administration.
Which, I mean, they're hoping that they'll evade further, government scrutiny and regulation. Like, is that part of it?
That is definitely part of it. I think there's probably also things that they're lobbying for proactively. Yeah. I've been thinking this week a lot about sort of trickle-down effects of the TikTok ban. And Meta has been really pushing for TikTok to be banned for obvious reasons. Because who's going to benefit from one of Instagram Reels, et cetera? Yeah, I think that they probably have a lot of objectives that they're hoping to accomplish in addition to just not getting any more lawsuits aimed their way. I'm sure they're hoping that the Trump administration is going to take a very different approach to antitrust than Lina Khan, and they might be able to buy some platforms that they otherwise wouldn't be allowed to. The Biden administration's FTC chair, Lina Khan, has been very aggressive in her approach to Silicon Valley. She has really tried to stop further consolidation in every major industry in the US, but particularly in Silicon Valley. And so companies like Meta that might want to buy, for example, like a smaller app, during the Biden administration, it was not considered a great time for a tech company to buy another tech company. Lina Khan was really aggressive in the way that she went after Silicon Valley bigwigs that were trying to further consolidate their industries. I think that, Meta made a lot of major acquisitions in the past, WhatsApp, Instagram, and I'm sure it would like to make more, but recent years, it hasn't really been in a position to do so without almost inevitably getting hit with an antitrust lawsuit if it tried to acquire another company. So I would assume that one of the goals of Meta right now is to sort of grease the wheels to allow it to become larger and larger through mergers, acquisitions, and whatever else it has up its sleeve.
One other point of evidence in this column is the $1 million that Meta gave to Trump's inauguration fund. And I was thinking about that in terms of the last time Trump was elected president and the sort of response, particularly at Meta, but maybe more broadly in tech, to that political moment. And I mean, I remember it looking quite different, at Facebook in particular, because Facebook was under some really intense scrutiny for its role in, amplifying misinformation, allowing Russia to kind of spread fake propaganda stories. How does that moment compare to this one in terms of tech and especially Meta's response to the political zeitgeist?
They really couldn't be more different. Back in 2016, I felt like most of the tech CEOs who operated social platforms were going on apology tours for their role in potentially electing Donald Trump. They certainly weren't clamoring to stand with him and pay for his inauguration parties. And we're seeing that. It's like, it's so alarming that it's just happening across the board. It's not just Mark Zuckerberg. It's not just Elon Musk. It's basically all of the major tech CEOs, including TikToks, are coming to the inauguration, and a lot of them have written fat checks to fund the party. And yeah, that would have never happened to the degree that it is now in 2016, because they were trying to basically apologize back then for their role in getting this guy in office.
Yeah, and that's actually what spurred, I think, some of the things that Facebook is rolling back now, like the fact checking and the investment in, moderation and stuff like that. I mean, to me, this is why it feels less like people just trying to please Donald Trump and more like perhaps a lasting realignment toward a new, American trajectory. It makes me think of the companies that stopped posting about Pride, or, Target sort of hiding its Pride collection under a bushel, where it's like things that I didn't even, that meant absolutely nothing to me. And, I never trusted that companies were on our side or anything as queer and trans people. Now I'm realizing that it actually did mean something as a sort of indicator of where the country was and where our culture was headed. And so this, as an indicator of where the country is headed, a lot of people live a great deal of their news and information and social lives on social platforms, is just incredibly troubling to think about the lasting impact that this might have. And also just, again, as a little canary in the coal mine, when you're thinking about trying to get a handle on what's going on in the rest of the country.
Absolutely. And one of the things that Meta recently changed that hasn't gotten quite as much attention, but I think is just really another example of how far it's going here completely unnecessarily, is that it changed these themes that it formerly offered in its chat products. Like, one was the colors of the trans flag, and I think one was a rainbow flag. Anyways, it basically removed all queer connection from these themes.
Oh my God.
Yeah, they did that on purpose. And it's just kind of mind-boggling that they would go through so much trouble to be so hostile. And I guess I've been expecting there to be a bigger and more immediate backlash, like a mass exodus of Meta employees, for example. But I mean, I know it's like a tough job market. I'm not saying that gay and trans Meta employees are obliged to quit, but I guess I was expecting more of a splashier backlash. And so far it's been like Meta's AI attorney quit, which is good on him. But I'm not hearing that much about like rank and file employees leaving. And I think I did also expect there to be more of a push for consumer boycotts. Honestly, maybe it's just that these products are so ingrained in our digital lives that it's hard to imagine people boycotting them.
I think that's true. Yeah. But yeah, the colors, the themes, it's like something that's so stupid and really didn't do much to enhance the lives of trans people who use that theme, or, anyone else who wanted to use that theme. But somehow the taking away of it feels like such a deep insult and almost frightening, because it just shows how pervasive this impulse is among people at Meta and a lot of these other big companies that are trying to curry favor with Trump, to fully align with their perspective that, trans people don't exist and queer people are a danger, and that it's legitimate political discourse to dehumanize us. And to the point of, whether there's going to be a big exodus from these companies, I also saw I think it was on Platformer, Casey Newton reported that Alex Schultz, who's Meta's chief marketing officer and the, highest ranking gay person at the company, he suggested in an internal post for Meta employees that actually maybe these new policies are good for LGBTQ people, because if people saw their trans and queer loved ones being abused on social media, that could actually increase their support for LGBTQ rights. It's like I'm sure there are a lot of people who work at these places who, just need a job and, of course, and aren't in a position to quit over this. But I'm sure there are also people who are able to engage in these convoluted mental gymnastics to convince themselves that they're doing something good for America and also maybe doing something good for LGBTQ people, that like, yeah, actually, let's see exactly how terrible the hate is out there, and maybe that'll do something good.
That is really, really wild.
Isn't that repulsive?
I did hear Andrew Bosworth, another Facebook executive, did address the remarks, which is notable because like a lot of them just really haven't waded in on these specific changes. And he did criticize the way that the document was written. Specifically, he said that it shouldn't have used the phrase transgenderism, which was something that a lot of people pointed out was really alarming because that's, considered a dog whistle term that's frequently used in anti-trans rhetoric. So that shows that there are people, I guess, at least thinking critically about what they could have done differently, but it's still kind of wild that that was the big takeaway that he had, and not, hey, maybe we shouldn't have made these incredibly cruel carve-outs.
The other thing that I imagine some employees are thinking is like, maybe I can change this from within. And I think about the fact that, these are people who work at Meta are engaging in a specific workplace. But it also feels like with the changes that Meta is making, the workplace might become less diverse and less inclusive too. In fact, they've, as part of their sort of pro-Trump policy shifts, they've ended all programs and initiatives related to diversity, equity, inclusion. Can you speak about, is Meta sort of unique in that realm, or is that something that's going on elsewhere too?
No, it's joining a long list of companies, including like major corporations like McDonald's, that are cutting DEI programs. And I think it really is all connected. Like the cuts to Meta's DEI programs happening at the same time as these hate speech policies changing is not a coincidence. They are very much part of this rightward shift that we're talking about. And they, I think, work together in tandem. If you have less queer people on your staff, you might have less outcry over making transphobic and homophobic policies, unfortunately.
Right.
So yes, they're definitely connected, and it's part of an industry-wide rightward shift.
Yeah. I want to talk about, what does this mean for the future of Facebook and Instagram? Do you think people should move to other platforms? Do you foresee there being some sort of big boycott movement?
I think one thing that's going to make a large-scale boycott movement difficult is the fact that there just aren't that many viable alternatives that have the network effect necessary to create online communities. Like, okay, people were leaving and still are leaving X for Blue Sky, and Blue Sky has really gained momentum as an X replacement, and that's great. But there is no sort of Blue Sky Instagram yet, and I don't know if one will develop quickly enough or at all. And then we have this stuff happening with TikTok, and that might also happen to other foreign-owned apps where we're losing alternatives because they're Chinese. And there's been this big migration going on from TikTok to RedNote, which is another Chinese vertical video app, happening. And one thing that it's been really lovely. I joined RedNote, and it's been really cool and lovely to watch this cultural exchange going on between Chinese internet users and American internet users. And people are really enjoying just seeing how like an actual native Chinese social platform works. And that's great. And I think we should be allowed to be on that kind of platform. But especially in this environment, it's kind of a bummer that like that's the new big app coming up, because it abides by CCP policies. Would not consider it super open to LGBTQ people. And there have already been sort of tutorials on how to behave on the app, and they'll say stuff like, everyone who's from Taiwan, actually you're from China. Like it's not sort of this liberatory space really at all. And so this situation is like a really sad reminder of how dominant Meta is and how difficult it is to have an online experience without it. If you have any family overseas, like what's the WhatsApp replacement? I've been trying to convince people to use Signal, but like it's hard to convince entire communities to switch apps. And I think the fact that all of the governments allowed Facebook to grow this dominant has created a situation where people who want to boycott it are in a tough position.
Man, it just really feels like we've completely rewound the past 25 years.
I know. I kind of feel like it's just the 80s part 2, this time with phones, which is worse.
Yeah. That's all the time we have for this week. If you want to read Kate's great piece on this, it's on Wired. It's titled "Meta Now Lets Users Say Gay and Trans People Have Mental Illness." Really says it all right there in the headline. Thank you so much for being here, Kate.
Thanks for having me.
That's it for our show today, but there's always more Outward over in the Slate Plus feed. This week, Kate Knibbs is sticking around to help us update the gay agenda. If you're not already a Slate Plus subscriber, remember, by joining Slate Plus, you'll get ad-free podcasts, extra segments on all our shows, and you'll never hit a paywall on the Slate site. Subscribe now on Apple Podcasts by clicking Try Free on the top of the Outward show page, or visit slate.com/Outward Plus to get access wherever you listen. We're always interested in your feedback and would love to hear your topic ideas at outwardpodcast@slate.com. Our show is produced by Palace Shaw, who donated $0 to Donald Trump's inauguration fund. If you like Outward, please subscribe in your podcast app, tell your friends about it, and rate and review us so other people can find it. Stay gay, everyone.